everybody. Thank you for coming. We've had a really amazing response to this, so we are glad that you will be the first lot of people that come through, and hopefully we can keep doing it. We are proud to be hosting what we feel is an important discussion tonight, and it will hopefully allow the community of artists, curators and prospective applicants to get a better insight into what the gallery's review exhibition application process is. Before we start tonight's proceedings, I'd like to take a moment to thank our dedicated volunteers, board members, our sponsors for the wine and the wild next door, for all their support and dedication. I'd also like to thank the panellists for donating their time tonight, which we are very thankful for. I just want to introduce the panellists really quickly for all those that don't know. So on the end we've got Channon. He's the current director of bus projects. Prior to this he held positions in the Metro Arts in Brisbane and Queensland Art Gallery. He was also the co-founding director of Box Copy in Brisbane. This is Sophie. She's a King's RE board member and a practicing artist who has exhibited in numerous spaces all over Melbourne, including Bus, King's and C3. And Michelle in the middle. She's the gallery manager for the Centre of Contemporary Photography, and she's also a board member here at 7th. She's got a Master's in Art History with a postgraduate in Museum Studies and has held internships at the NGV and Museum Victoria. She's also currently co-curating at Deakin University. So how it's going to run tonight is we've got 5 questions that I'm going to be posing to the panel. We're going to do a bit of a discussion for about 45 minutes and then we'll do a Q&A, so you're welcome to ask questions afterwards if you still have them. And bear in mind, this is just for applying to exhibit at galleries, not applying to write grants and stuff, just in case people thought that's what the proposals were. But anyway, we'll get started. So, Channon, over to you. What makes a good proposal?
Thanks everyone for coming. As you said, really good discussion. And as Bus Projects' program is predominantly applications, it's a really good question to ask us, in the sense that it's one of the main tasks of our group, in a way, is to work out mechanisms whereby not only how can the gallery support as many artists as possible, but how can we make the application process as accessible as possible. That question of what makes a good proposal is very particular. As everyone would know, getting faced with questions or with answers or advice such as include really high quality documentation, make sure your ideas are very clear. Those things are certainly things that I noted down, like 3 things like simplicity, clarity and quality could be a general thing, but they're very particular, I guess, to each one of you as artists or curators that may be thinking of applying to our program. And what we try to do, I guess, from our point of view, is our response to that is to simplify what we ask and to open up the minds of the people assessing in terms of what the kind of responses that we receive. So if you look at our application process, it's a very simple question, very short word limits, and just encourages you to articulate your ideas, attach your CV and some support material. So for us, that question of what makes a great application tends to be that how you combine those elements to make your argument. It tends to be an equally weighted consideration as our committee sits down to kind of look at these things in terms of assessing that question of quality. So as a general rule, though, I guess from my point of view as an artist making applications myself, it tended to be always the struggle of how to simply articulate your conceptual foundation, on top of that clear foundation to describe how you're approaching an opportunity in this particular gallery, and also to own uncertainties around what was eventually ending up in the space. So that would be not necessarily pretending that I had a defined outcome, but to simply say, these are my ideas, these are how I propose, or these are the things I'm proposing to do for the show, a range of new work, etc. And then to try to complement that with not only a clear and simple kind of CV, but as always, this kind of mantra around making sure your documentation is at a certain high standard, that generally is something I never followed myself. I always, I can't say that I would ever consider the applications I used to make as an artist to meet these criteria. I would have not have selected myself, and that was a combination of things. That was, perhaps a certain anxiety around the long-windedness of what I put in the application, maybe trying to cover up maybe for anxieties around what I thought of as perhaps some inexperience in my practice, when in fact a stronger application would have been to simply articulate that and to own the fact that I wasn't sure where these outcomes would, or this pathway would kind of lead. And I never got someone to do my documentation. I would always do it myself, and that was terrible. At least unless you have a real skill set in that area, it's always great to get someone else to do your application documentation, if possible. So generally what we're faced with in terms of a general idea of a great quality application is something that's quite simple, that doesn't necessarily profess to kind of be too certain of outcomes, and that's complemented with a great range of suitably sized, well taken, colour corrected photographic documentation or video as well. So general ideas there, start us off.
I would definitely agree with Shannon that I think there's a tendency to overcomplicate things sometimes, and the hardest thing about application writing is paring it back and making it just simple and clear. And I think it's always good to, if you're putting in an application, come visit the space and kind of mention how you're considering the space and how you want to show your work. I think, just a common mistake that people make is they write these beautiful artist statements, but they don't actually tell us what they actually want to put into the gallery. So, even if it changes, it does help to let us know that you're thinking of, putting in 7 paintings, and maybe that you've thought about the space and which walls you'd put them on and how that would work. And that just kind of signals to us that you've thought about it a little bit more.
Yeah. And what do you think from the King's perspective?
From the King's perspective, so we're going to talk about the specifics of support material in a little bit, but from what makes a good proposal, I think really considering who is reading it and the conditions in which they read it. So being conscious that you're trying to communicate what is obviously a really broad and complex practice in really few words, and being really just comfortable that you're not writing a thesis, and the people that are reading your proposal are predominantly, I guess, volunteers in this industry, and they're not trying to critique everything about your practice. So just be as clear and as honest and as simple as possible, and where possible just keep linking back your proposal to your documentation and seeing how, and saying, so this image or this kind of work is what I'm proposing. This is indicative of an idea, but not exactly the specific work. And from my point of view, just trying to be really simple, clear, honest. Yeah, that's my...
Yeah, no, it is true. The simplicity thing's very... the easiest and the most prolific issue we have with all applications is the works might be amazing, but if we can't really understand what you're trying to work with, what you're going to put in the space, how it's going to work, so just keep it as simple as possible. And as you said, the support material is great for that, because if the idea is well laid out and the support material is there, we'll really understand what it is that and how that then is going to work with the other shows, which is what we always take into consideration, and then also which space your work will work best in, because that is always a consideration with all the applications. So,
and I think if you're unsure, get someone else to read your proposal. It's like an easy thing, but sometimes it just takes another set of eyes to sort of point out, well, what does that sentence actually mean, or what are you trying to say here? It can be really helpful, even if it's just a friend, to read over it.
I'd also add into that I guess it's hard to kind of give an exact kind of thing, but you can, if you want, you can be quite challenging in terms of how, at least from our point of view, how you approach that text thing. Not everyone approaches the context of an application in the same way. Maybe the very process of that is not doesn't synchronise with your practice. Maybe you reject that kind of institutionalised kind of language. I would just think that when doing that, we certainly welcome really challenging, both in terms of the kind of documentation that we get and the kind of text that we get. We receive applications that describe it in a very, or describe their work in a way that rejects those kind of definitions and boundaries. That's totally fine. I think it's then, if that is your case, I think that can often be, that tends to progress in our applications if the CV evidence is how their practice has grown, and how we can, that asks us then to understand the seriousness of this practice and the reasons for a different approach, and sometimes this notion of really great exhibition view documentation, which tends to be the most effective. Sometimes people's practice really rejects that kind of situation as well, and that's fine as well. Again, it's just thinking about how the other aspects of the application may help to turn that into actually a positive, to claim that difference in terms of how you show your work. Or how you articulate your work in documentation and text. I think it's just this combination that you can play around with, and hopefully that will help it to feel strong. So.
Well, that brings us to our next question, which is what kind of support materials should you include? So we'll pass that one over to Sophie to start.
So, from one of the most common things that we find at King's is that people don't necessarily stick to the guidelines that's for how to submit their support material, which is as simple as the application, the set number of support images at a certain size, and a CV. I think just going back to thinking about how the committee views the support material, just sticking to those guidelines it just helps you along because it streamlines it. So if some people will use like a Dropbox, or some people will print out, it just sort of keeping to the guidelines that have asked from the different galleries, that will really just firstly help your proposal along. The second thing is, I know that Channon has already mentioned this, but really great images will do so much of the talking for you. And so I guess I come from a photography background, and I still pay for all of my documentation to be taken by somebody else, just because I know how great it is, how important it is to have great lighting. And I think the thing that comes from having a photographer that isn't, it's not their artwork that they're photographing, you get a really true, honest, clear image of what the work's doing, not your own idea in your head. So I work with sculpture and installation, and I go in and I think something that can often happen is people photograph their work as an overall kind of artwork in itself, rather than just being like a beautiful, clear image of what the piece actually is. So I guess examples of photos that are trying to be artwork is, I'm just trying to think of some examples. Yeah, so, sorry. My experience as a photographer is people go in and take these really detailed, amazing images of artwork, and actually when you're viewing it from a committee member's perspective, you've got no idea of the scale or of the installation. So having a professional come in is really good. Sorry. The next thing that I have written down here is to think about how the support material is going to be viewed. And so often people present images in a PDF, but they're absolutely too large, or the file sizes don't load nicely on the computer screen. And so if you can think about maybe formatting it so that it loads nicely and is viewed nicely on screens, that's good. Another point that I really think is helpful is using, if you get the option to use an image list, that's great, because you can link back. You can explain clearly what the documentation is, whether or not it's specifically work that will be in the exhibition, or whether it's indicative of an idea. And sometimes for King's, because we ask for a PDF, what's really great is if you can include captions. So directly while I'm looking at your image, I'm also reading, oh, this is an idea of the show, this is actually work for the show. And include things like where this was shown, because that's a little snippet of your CV into that caption. Also scale, medium, date, all that. So just use those little opportunities that the criteria for the actual application gives you as a way of just injecting more information, more clarity. Just basic. Make sure your online links work beautifully. That's just double check it, because sometimes things happen. Double check that. And then CVs. That's probably the last thing we ask for in a whole suite of material. They are important. For Kings, they're actually the last thing we look at. There's plenty of people who have shows, and we probably, as a committee, never ever discuss your CV as a group. Usually we all assess, you'll hear about how we do our selection, but CVs, try and keep it to just what's relevant to your art practice. Obviously we care about if you've volunteered at galleries or if you've had different grants, but just keep it specific to your art practice. And the main things that will make a difference is seeing that seeing that you've had experience putting the show together, and that'll often be the difference for us saying, oh, we know they've pulled it off before.
Even if it's, a grad show, you're applying for your first exhibition, anything that you've sort of done that backs up that exhibition experience is really helpful. And also I'd say, research the space a little bit, because like somewhere like 7th, we show people straight out of grad school quite a bit, but other galleries might need you to have exhibited at a few places and kind of build up a bit of a list under your belt. But I would totally agree. I think so much time is wasted sorting through images because they're not labelled properly, trying to get that all together. And it's something so simple. Just label your images the way you've been asked. Because what seems simple to you isn't simple to the person reading it, and trying to figure out what this image is actually showing them, whether it's showing them previous work you've done, whether it's showing you work that you're intending to make or that you've made, and that you're proposing for the space is really, really important. I think that kind of touched.
I guess I can, I sort of have roughed that out in my last couple of answers, our approach to that. This topic of documentation. I think in terms of documentation generally being images and CV or video links and CV, we do fluctuate back and forwards looking at, I guess because we get a lot of applications, I'm sure likewise everyone gets a lot of applications. Ours have doubled each year since we've been in our new site down the road. So really what we end up having to do, because we have so many, and this maybe relates later to rejections or whatever, but what we have to do a lot and really kind of consider, or our group sits down and considers the benefit for you of showing with us. And that can often be the frequency of exhibiting, the fact that you've exhibited with us a year ago. All of these things need to come into play in terms of, because a lot of our thinking is really about how we can benefit the scene, the ecology here, what role we kind of play in that, and how overall our program can support people in the most effective way. So we do tend to refer back to CVs to see where people are at in their careers, how that kind of matches to the scale of show they're looking to present as well. So again, I think this is a question as well about how we assess things, but the committee itself is we try to have us be as informed as possible in terms of the sector. And that really helps us to make informed decisions about, with reference to CV, with reference to documentation, where this artist is at in their career, and how being part of our program will therefore help further that career as articulated in your application, or whichever kind of way you reinforce that with your actual application text. So, and again, the other thing with people who perhaps are listening to things like, get professional documenters to do it. This could be, your artist friend who does a dollar documentation. Yeah. It helps you benchmark as well. I mean, this is, in a way it's kind of a bit of a cheat sheet in terms of what the standard answer would be, but if your friend documents a lot of shows around town, they'll know what galleries want, more demanding galleries perhaps, or institutions look for, and that way it will ring it'll ring bells when people kind of see that documentation. It's just really about removing obstacles in a way. Is my imagery at appropriate size when it's being shown at the committee? Well, that's an obstacle down. That's great. Tick. Is my CV clear? Does it lay out things in a very clear way? Does it not use kind of overly creative fonts? Well, great. That's great. That's not going to be a question people ask. Like, why is this? I can't even. There's like watermarks, aggressive watermarks, and these kind of things are really just about removing those kind of thoughts from people's minds so they can get to that core group of details, and that way you can still be quite challenging. You don't have to conform, in any kind of way that you find objectionable to your practice, but it is just about kind of this clarity of stuff, which is really just about not overcomplicating, I guess doing those core things well.
Yeah, that's right. And it is actually a lot of the answers will be based on taking the simple approach. That's what we're really trying to reiterate here. Is it doesn't need to be complicated. Just as you said, get the base things right. Another really, really little one, but as you said, it's like maybe always put your application into one email and don't send through your CV and then your images and then your text and all that sort of stuff. We get 150, 200 applications, so things might get lost. It's a detriment to you that process is undertaken. You need to have it all really organised so we can go in for our day and we can just get it as organised as possible, so that and it's to your advantage, so that we can really understand what you're trying to propose. So that brings us to our next question, which is how does each gallery view and review their application? So Michelle, take it away.
Great. So I'm going to chat about how Seventh does it. I'm actually really excited to hear about how the other spaces do it. But basically, we kind of all the board members contribute to this decisions. We all volunteer our time, so we dedicate a day and spend the whole day looking at applications. Like Sophie said, we get between 150 to 200, and our initial process is just like a first impressions kind of process where each board member sits and reads through each application. We pass them round. Your application is read by 7 or 8 different people. And then just from that, we sort of mark off on a little sheet on top of every application, yes, maybe, no, and then comments. And it's always really interesting because you kind of never really get an application that's all no's or all yeses, which is kind of healthy because it's the discussion amongst the board as to what people think is strong work and what people think could be improved upon. And obviously decisions come into play, like Channon mentioned, like has this person exhibited with us last year? Are there enough spaces to show their work again? Those sort of simple things. But once we've done an initial sort of read over of all the applications and look through all the images, we sit with the piles of yeses and basically discuss them, and it can be quite robust discussion because some people will really not like a work and some people will really fight for it, and again it's that thing like the simpler you've made it, the easier it is to kind of champion your case if we think your work's really good and wanted and other people disagree. But it does take sort of the whole day, and you're exhausted by the end, like you just can't even think straight. And we usually have a meeting afterwards just to rethink the ones that we've said yes to. And that's kind of the basics of it. I don't know if Sophie has anything to add.
Yeah, we sit down and with those sheets we try and take into consideration the time period that the artist is nominated, which is usually a question on ours, and I think maybe it's on yours as well, preferred months. And then we also spend quite a bit of time with the yes pile after the extended amount of time sifting through, working out how the shows will work together as well. So when we see clear themes, we try as hard as we can to put the shows together based on people's availability. So often what will happen is that you may get a show at a time that you didn't want, or you may get a show at a time in a space that you didn't want, but this is the board's feeling for the best outcome for your show and for how it works in the space. So that's something to bear in mind with our process, because we really want what we feel as a professional board.
It's
that
kind of,
is,
we are programming a whole, 6 months to a year, so we can't just think about each individual artist. We've got to think of the program as a whole, and what the space can kind of accommodate within sort of time frames. And I think it's really quite fluid, the discussion. Like sometimes things come out of the no pile, sometimes they go back, sometimes yes, things get taken off the table or put back. And I think what is really important to kind of think of, and we do get to sort of like how to handle rejection, but just if your application gets turned down, there are a lot of factors to think about. It's not necessarily because we didn't like your work, or it's some sort of thing that you're not producing good work. Sometimes it's just whether we could accommodate your application within our program at that time. So I would always give the advice, don't be disheartened, always ask for feedback and apply again. You kind of, the only way to master it is by applying again and again.
It's true. Yeah. And how does Bus do the application round?
Well, it's pretty similar. The other thing I was going to come on just on the previous point as well, I guess some people may just be like, damn it, I want practical answers to these questions. I guess in terms of good quality documentation, there was something I kept in mind was to even have a look at, because I know they upload a lot, Minerva in Sydney. It's a semi-commercial space in Sydney, and that's an example of what I would consider to be, pretty benchmark artist documentation, contemporary documentation of artwork. So there's an answer if you're looking to what we kind of consider. That's kind of probably what I would benchmark Minerva. So in terms of assessment of applications, it's very similar. It's a committee process. We have formalised staffing positions at BUS. However, it's still very collegiate in terms of how the selection is made. And as we said, the fact that we try to gather a committee that has a lot of expertise, that really stops us from letting a certain, personal taste kind of creep into it. We try to structure it so that we have a great program. That doesn't mean that it's a conservative program. It doesn't mean it's a program that preferences any particular art form. We don't have necessarily a stylistic mandate about what we show or the kinds of work we show or the age of the artist we show. We're now 15 years old, and I know most people here are around the 10 or 15 years. So in that sense, we are working with artists who potentially had their first show with us and who are now quite senior and are coming back to show with us, or so we've got a mix of program, which means that we can't necessarily enter the selection process with a closed mind. So we sit down with about 8 people around a table. It's driven by our curator, Marty Spencer-Castle, and the committee will go through all of the applications. We will have generally had a conversation before about applications that either were incomplete or in some way, because of the nature of the application, were uncompetitive. And that is a process that is gone through before we arrive at the table. We still have them there. We still have the applications visible, and we'll say anyone in terms of the pool that is uncompetitive for the various reasons proposed. Let's bring them out of that area for debate, and then that happens. We'll inevitably take a while to do that, and then we'll discuss our shortlist, and we'll go through each application and question why we've chosen it, and make sure that again there's a discussion around. We challenge our own presumptions around that, and then we'll end up handing it back to the curator, and they'll go and negotiate space and timing. So that's a conversation beyond the selection. So once we've committed to, once we say this artist is well suited to be part of our program, we'll benefit their career, then they're selected, and we'll go away and select that. It won't be based on their particular preference of space. We'll go and negotiate that after.
Yeah.
For King, we do it pretty much the same, except we do a pre-rank before. And I don't know if that's an economy of time thing, but everybody, we don't print our applications. Everything gets dropped into a Dropbox at the end of the application round. It's then every committee member has to go away for, I think we have about a week. We read every one of the applications just in our own time, after work, whenever. Then we have a set day that we get together about a week or so after the round's closed to bring our kind of list forward with all of our ranks and our numbers. And we sit down and we have a computer and a projector set up, and we have a computer and a matrix, just an Excel spreadsheet set up with everybody's name, who's applied, what spaces they want, what month they want, and then we kind of go around the table, and we don't use numbers, we just use high, low, no, low, maybe, low, yes, high, yes. They're literally how they get written down. So that's the first round. Then we sort of see how what breaks down out of that. Then we just look at the number of spaces we have to fill, how many of our high yeses fill that, and we sort of work through. And really, it is amazing how different people can different practices, different backgrounds, what they bring into that conversation. There are some shows that I just think, oh, they're just going to love this show, and then I get there and somebody really fights me on it, and I think, wow, maybe, and vice versa. So it's a really great space to have your work looked in, I think, by a community of people who really care and who really want a great program put together. And just want to second that if a show doesn't go ahead, or if you get sorry, you were unsuccessful this time, I guarantee you there was someone fighting for your work and could see the just how great your proposal was. It just isn't.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's healthy that you kind of have a panel of people who don't agree, and it's almost a bit worrying if, a work gets all yeses or all no's, whatever. You kind of need that discussion to happen. And, we try to keep quite detailed comments so that there is the opportunity for feedback if you want it and request it. Because we do, we want to help nurture young artists, and that's kind of part of it.
Yeah, we were actually discussing before the panel started that we were saying that a lot of the time it feels like the galleries are not on your side, where you say no, that we say no. But it's really not the case. We're here to try and help, and we really want you to develop your applications, and we try to have a very rigorous process of considering, and lots of eyes, looking at it, lots of minds working through it. And we try to give each application some serious consideration. So just so that everyone is aware of that, because it's good to know that we do care about all the applications that are submitted. So yeah, but this comes to the next question. So how to handle rejection? I'll pass that one over to you, Channon.
Right. Well, I mean, again, following on from that, like just kind of keeping it flowing from that point, I guess, in terms of these spaces that are represented here come from the artist-run tradition, in a sense of artists running spaces for other artists to show at. And in that sense, you're right, it is supposed to be as supportive as possible, and the intent of us is to try to give as many opportunities as possible to people. And really, I guess, for us, we've increased our galleries, but they're not large galleries, but we wanted to provide opportunity for people to initiate an idea in a space, and to try to I guess, extend the opportunity within the program to as many people as possible. That means we have about 75 exhibitions a year in our space. That's each 3 weeks we turn over. So that still means, though, that we have to reject at least. I guess if we get around 250 for each call, then that's still over halfway. In terms of people we have to knock back. And what I guess I hope, and from seeing the way that people structure their exhibiting regime or schedule, hopefully that simply means that and generally hopefully within that process there are enough galleries whereby we can each balance each other's kind of programs, and they'll be showing somewhere else, or there'll be opportunities around. I think there's still quite a lot of people coming out of art schools, kind of, or trying to sustain their practices here in Australia, and I think there is still a kind of a problem around opportunity and the number of galleries. We're happy we have a concentrated number in Melbourne, which is great, but we get a lot of interstate now as well. I think there's still a few galleries that people are applying to about similar ilk, Thought Spaces, Alaska perhaps, but they don't. They have a particularly bespoke program, First Draft. All of these kind of galleries, there's very few in Queensland. There's one or two, as I said. Box Copy doesn't necessarily call out often. So acknowledging that it's very tough and that there are few opportunities. And so, for us, there's still a bulk of people who reject, and we try to do that as kindly as possible and with as much care as possible, I guess, because we're all artists generally running bus, and there's at least that on the board is sort of half and half, artists, half art workers. So we are very sensitive to that rejection process, and hopefully that's simply about us trying to be advocates. Even if we're not supporting you in the program, we're advocating for you in the sector, and hopefully that in some way helps to mitigate some of the negatives of not having an exhibition in our program. But yeah, we provide feedback if you would like, and we try to give a nice email saying that you won't accept. We don't use aggressive language in our email. We don't put "you were not successful" in the top. We try to soften the blow a little.
Yeah, I think Channon kind of summed that up beautifully.
Yeah. Did you have any
I think the only thing I would say is don't take it personally and try again. I remember chatting to an artist who got one of the Gertrude studio spaces, and he said he applied for 5 years in a row before he got it. So don't underestimate that, we don't know who you are, won't remember, your applications from previous years, and there is a real benefit to just persisting and trying, and you might be at the right place at the right time and be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't be deterred. There are so many no's that go out. I mean, I personally have put in plenty of applications for shows and grants, and you get no's back. And I think you get tougher, but it doesn't sort of affect you very much. By the end, you're like, oh yeah, missed that one.
Yeah.
Oh great. So it's not. I think it's just part of being an artist and putting applications in and putting yourself out there. And I think proposal writing is a really great generative process, and you learn so much about great.
And if you've put a lot of work into an application, like Channon said, if you get turned away from bus, apply to Kings and Sevens.
Yeah.
They're always sort of applications open at some point with different spaces, and just keep applying to as many spaces as you can. We're lucky here in Melbourne.
Yeah. Having said that, don't apply for the same.
Oh, don't put in the same proposal.
Don't put the same proposal to the same different spaces, because we'll know. Firstly, most of the time we know, and then if that work's exhibited, for example, at King's, and the same applications come to 7th, and you've also had a show, that becomes problematic. I mean, you can change the work, but challenge yourself as well. Do different applications that suit the gallery that you were applying for. We are different. We have different physical spaces. We have slightly different sort of maybe conceptual things that we go for. So don't do the same application, because a lot of the time it's going to be of a shortfall to you, and do different work and challenge yourself. And that's a little bit more time consuming, but as you said, it's a process that's really good for your practice to go through, a few times. So that's something that I would definitely suggest as well. Awesome, we're almost there. So the last question we have is, how do you propose works that you haven't made yet, which is a big one?
Yeah. I found this quite interesting. I think, personally with 7th, we are happy to take risks, and we're kind of excited by people proposing work that they haven't made yet. But I think it's really difficult, and it goes back to support material. When you need to sort of just again be really simple and clear about what you're proposing, but also giving us 10 images of work that you've made previously that's completely unrelated to the work that you're making it just confuses us, and it sort of really sort of counts against you if we're still unsure about what you're actually suggesting in the space. That said, we understand that you might not have physically made the work yet, and I think maybe put in a few, maybe 1 or 2 images that show previous works that aren't related if you have to, but where you can put in works that are indicative of what you're creating. And even if it's like your sort of workbook stuff where it's like your initial playing around with the material, or sketches that you've put together, I think sometimes it's still more helpful than us looking at photographs of work that just doesn't relate to what you're proposing. I think that was just a really common mistake that people made. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
I think I totally agree, but it comes back to how your proposal is written, to just being really upfront and clear, and have it, the work that I'm proposing isn't made yet, and referring back to your support material, and these are images that are indicative of the idea, and I'm putting them in to demonstrate. You don't have to write that, but they're there to demonstrate that your ability to put a show like this together, and just making that distinction clear. What are really the actual open works? What are works that are indicative? Because it's surprising how many people don't make it clear, and at the end of the day you're looking at an application, you just have no idea what the actual artwork's going to be. And I think, again, just simple, clear sentences, and don't overestimate the power in just really clearly stating what the work's going to be. And it can change, because work changes, and we're open to that. A lot of exhibitions, I think, that we eventually show are quite different from their proposal, but a clear proposal allows us to sort of see what you're thinking, and that you have sort of the ability to clearly, think through what work you're going to produce, because it is exciting for us as a risk, but there is a little bit of caution, I guess, when we're completely unsure what is happening in this proposal.
So I guess a little different in the sense that and again, maybe it's just a simple stylistic approach to it. So for me, I guess when when reading proposals, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me, and tends not to matter to our selection committee so much in terms of exacting description of exactly what's going to happen with floor plans and sketches. And I mean, that in a sense is a little bit of a turn off for the panel, and that's only because we know it'll change. Generally, the whole point of our gallery is to support work that is going to be very unexpected. So we'll generally use that documentation to help us to understand the practice that we're engaging with, the stage that you're at in your practice and career, and once we've, I guess, committed to support the practice, this is where this kind of equation of the text, the documentation, and CV work together. We'll then really generally kind of refer to make sure that there is, if there is in the text something that says, I'm simply going to make new work in line with my practice. Here's some images of previous exhibitions that I've been in. Great. And if it says and if the text says I'm going to have a complete departure from this, I'm going to now pour concrete into the gallery and fill up the space and provide and wall off the entryway, and that's, I guess, the difference where we'll then look for reassurance and explanation about how we're going to get into our office. But in that sense, the over-fixation on defined, exacting description of what we're going to see doesn't really matter that much. I would, for us at least, concentrate on getting those other elements right to put the strongest case forward for your practice as a whole. Because that we, at least from the way our spaces are laid out, we know that the building that we're in, there are challenges to that site that we know you're going to have to address once you're in the space and feeling it out. Maybe it's a little different because we tend to be on site during install, we tend to help problem solve things a little bit. So in that sense, and we have a few meetings in the lead up to the show, these kind of things, so we know things are going to change. So once we've committed to your practice, I guess the work that, unless there's a big departure from your previous work, which you would have described in the text, we'll generally know things will change. So
I think that's really interesting, actually. Yeah, and I think, you know, sometimes just making it clear that you're making something that's maybe different is just helpful. It's just, good communication, and get someone to read it, and if they can understand what you're saying, then that's great.
Okay, well that's all from the questions from us, so we're going to throw it over to you all. Has anyone got any questions to ask the panellists?
Is there a data website or something where you can find photographers that will document your work?
I don't know of a specific
no, but you
website.
can always ask us as well.
Yeah.
Who documents our shows?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know.
And
of
so,
a specific-
We've always got recommendations,
Yeah.
so we always have people that the board is a really great resource of people. Our boards are always like that. They all come from different parts of the sector, the industry. They've often been working in the industry for a long time, so someone will be able to recommend that, and it's just a matter of sending us an email and we can help. Yeah.
How far out do you program?
I imagine it would vary from space to space, but we're about 6 months.
Yeah, where our application's call out is now. We're booked from the previous applications till May, and then we program from May till October, November. It's just going to depend on how many. We're a little bit more lenient, so if we get lots of great applications this time, we'll program a few more months in advance, and we sort of have it as a bit more of a fluid process instead of just having, we need to fill 4 months and then we do another call out.
But we
So-
usually do 2 a year.
We do usually do 2 a year.
Sort of roughly, so you can kind of expect towards the end of a year or the beginning of a year.
Yeah, that's right. And you guys are the same?
Yep, we're 2 a year. We're pretty
Yeah.
much 6 months.
Yeah.
6 months.
We do 2 a year, but we're trying to 12 months, where we
Yeah.
have some flexibility, but, so keep talking to us. But we do call outs sort of towards the end and towards the middle of each year for the middle of the next year.
Yeah.
Any difference in plan for group show?
I don't think so. I think the basis of it is the same. Just make sure that you really talk to the artists who are going to be a part of the group show. And just make sure your curatorial premise is nice and clear as well. Like, we'll be able to get a feel from the works that you show us in the images, how the show might work together. But it's the same premise, making sure you say these artists will be making new works, these artists are going to be contributing works they've already made. That will give us a bit of a better idea of how it could all work together. And just making your statement, your curatorial premise nice and clear, I would say.
Just nice admin things like format it all together so we get to read all the CVs together. We, and
even you know, sometimes just making it clear who's the curator
Yeah.
and who are the
who's
artists.
the contact
and,
point,
and
who do we want to talk to, and who's going to. Those kinds of things are just nice to, but not deciding, but just helping.
I don't have any extra on that. It's those things.
Yeah.
What about the collaboration of 2 people?
From my point of view, we have a show in the moment in Gallery 2, which is a collaboration with 3 artists, and it really just, if there's any questions around how you articulate whether you reject your identities once you're a collaborative, individual identities once you're as a collaborative group, that can simply be described in the application text. But I think if you're treating yourself as an artistic entity, then it also depends whether it's a new collaboration or previous one, then include the documentation as the entity from previous collaborative situations. But if it's a new collaboration or you don't take documentation of your collaborative outcomes, then just simply include documentation from each artist as a combined.
And then include 2 CVs.
Yeah, or unless though it's some people collaborate as an entity and they have a CV for that entity, which is fine as well.
At the back?
What makes a strong curatorial premise for a group show, and how to interpret feedback that the curatorial premise is not strong enough, which is the real type of feedback that I received?
That's a hard one. Yeah.
Well, I suppose it's just I think it's probably getting a bit repetitive from our end because it's always really the same problems. It's making sure that it's very clear. We've had applications that the curatorial premise of it is like very all over the place. There's lots of references to words that are big and that mean a lot, place, form, that sort of stuff. If your curatorial premise is, this is just for 7th, if your curatorial thing is place, and you say these artists explore place, then we're going to be like, okay, hang on, you need to, this is very broad, I would suggest. And then the other thing is it's place, and that's how it fits into these hundreds of frameworks. So how place is feminist, it's, you know, multi-dichotomous, it's historical, it's political. Okay, no, just pick a couple of frameworks, stick to those couple of frameworks, and then I think the premise of it will be a lot stronger, and then you can tie, it won't get confusing when you're tying in the artist's work because they're all relating to a similar sort of few elements in the premise that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you can have a lot of different ideas from different artist works, and it kind of becomes like a bit of a mush of too many different ideas. That said though, it's sort of hard to know without looking at the curatorial premise. And Olga, if you wanted me to look over it, I'd be happy to chat to you afterwards if you want.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to. Though that's true. Like wording of application can seem naive sometimes, or can seem that you're trying to hide an emptiness to the project. It's hard to kind of give an exact opinion on that kind of feedback. I mean, that could well have come from, you know, I don't know that I would say that, because it leaves me open to bias, like, oh, what does that kind of mean? And so myself, I wouldn't necessarily give that kind of feedback, because then I have to give another kind of answer. Yeah, it's tricky. I think generally it still relates back to the simplicity and clarity mantra that started this conversation, and generally it's the same situation that we'd see within someone else's text as an individual artist. If we sense a sort of an overwordedness that isn't connected to aspects of the application, then maybe that makes it less competitive. Sometimes, I mean, generally it'll get you a long way if your artist selection of your group show is exciting, and the idea itself is kind of true to those artists as well, like the fact that these artists do work with these ideas, and it seems like when you're reading it seems like a unified idea, you know, that these people, if it's exactly opposite, if you're like, I've never thought of that artist in that context, then own that within the application. Say, actually, we're